in the heart of Colorado's snowy mountains. A struggling single father named Jonas Hale keeps his small auto repair shop running on determination and hope. His 7-year-old daughter Maisie is his whole world, even as bills pile up and winter grows harsher. When a stranded woman arrives at his garage on a frozen evening, Jonas doesn't hesitate to help. It's just who he is. But Clare isn't just any traveler. She's one of the world's most successful tech entrepreneurs, secretly searching for something money can't buy: genuine love. Hiding her true identity, she finds herself drawn to Jonas's simple life of integrity and warmth. As snow traps them together for days, both discover feelings they never expected. But when Clare's secret is revealed, their fragile connection shatters. Will a billionaire's fortune destroy their chance at happiness, or can love truly conquer the deepest divides? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's sharp cry pierced the mountain silence at 5:30, same as every morning for the past 3 years. Jonas Hale's calloused hand found the snooze button with practiced ease, though he knew he wouldn't use those extra 9 minutes. Sleep had become a luxury he couldn't afford, not when every daylight hour meant another chance to keep his small world from crumbling. He swung his legs over the side of the narrow bed, wincing as his bare feet touched the cold wooden floor of the cabin. The old heating system wheezed and rattled, doing its best to fight off the Colorado winter, but losing the battle more often than not. Jonas had learned to live with perpetually cold hands and the constant ache in his joints that came from working. In an unheated garage, the cabin itself told the story of a man who'd once had bigger dreams. Wedding photos lined the hallway, showing a younger Jonas in his dress uniform, his arm around a radiant woman with kind eyes and auburn hair. Sarah had believed in his vision of building something lasting in these mountains, of raising their mountains, of raising their children in a place where values still mattered more than bank accounts now. 3 years after the cancer took her, Jonas found himself the sole guardian of that dream and their 7-year-old daughter Maisie. The insurance money had lasted 18 months. His military pension covered the basics, barely. The auto repair shop he'd bought with their savings was supposed to be their ticket to prosperity, but prosperity had proven as elusive as consistent. Heat in their drafty home. "Daddy?" Maisie's voice drifted from her bedroom, still thick with sleep. "Is it morning already?" "Not quite, sweetheart," Jonas called back, pulling on his work clothes. "Give me a few minutes to get the coffee started, then we'll see about some breakfast." The kitchen was small but functional, much like everything else in Jonas's life. He'd learned to find beauty in simplicity, partly from necessity and partly from the hard-won wisdom that came from losing everything that truly mattered. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the space with the rich aroma that had become his morning ritual. While the coffee brewed, Jonas stepped outside to check the weather. The forecast had been calling for snow and the heavy gray clouds hanging low over the peaks suggested the meteorologists had gotten it right for once. The wind carried the sharp bite of winter, the kind that made smart folks stay indoors and foolish ones venture out unprepared. His shop sat 50 yards from the cabin, a sturdy metal building that had seen better decades. The sign reading Hale's Auto Repair hung slightly crooked, a casualty of last month's windstorm that Jonas hadn't found time to fix. Inside, organized chaos reigned. Tools hung from pegboards with military precision, each in its designated spot. The hydraulic lift dominated the center bay, flanked by workbenches that bore the scars of countless repairs. This shop was Jonas's sanctuary, a place where broken things could be made whole again. It was also his albatross, the source of constant worry about overdue payments and dwindling customers. The bigger chain shops in town offered faster service and shinier waiting rooms, but Jonas held on to the belief that there was still value in careful work and honest prices. "Daddy, I'm hungry," Maisie announced, appearing in the kitchen doorway with her favorite stuffed elephant clutched under one arm. Her dark hair stuck up at impossible angles, and her pajamas were wrinkled from sleep, but to Jonas, she looked perfect. "Let's see what we can rustle up," he said, opening the refrigerator. The contents were sparse but sufficient. Eggs, milk, bread that was still good for another day. Jonas had become an expert at making much from little, turning simple ingredients into meals that felt like abundance through the alchemy of love and attention. As he scrambled eggs, Maisie climbed onto her chair at the small table, chattering about her upcoming school project on family history. Jonas listened with half an ear while keeping the other half tuned to the weather report on the radio. The storm was definitely coming, probably by evening. "Mrs. Patterson says we need to draw a family tree," Maisie explained, swinging her legs. "But I don't understand why Mommy gets to be on it if she's in heaven." Jonas set down the spatula and knelt beside his daughter's chair. These moments came without warning, piercing through the routine of daily life like unexpected wounds. Sarah had been gone for 3 years, but grief operated on its own timeline, surfacing when least expected. "Because family isn't just about who's here with us right now," he said carefully. "It's about everyone who helped make us who we are. Mommy is still part of our family, even though we can't see her anymore." Maisie nodded solemnly, processing this wisdom with the grave consideration children brought to life's mysteries. "Will you help me with the project?" "Of course, sweetheart. We'll work on it together." After breakfast, Jonas drove Maisie to school in his battered pickup truck, the same vehicle he'd been driving since his army days. The radio played softly as they wound through the mountain roads, past houses that ranged from modest like theirs to sprawling estates that belonged to people who discovered the area's beauty and had the means to claim a piece of it. "Remember, if the snow starts before I can pick you up, Mrs. Henderson will bring you to the shop," Jonas reminded her as she gathered her backpack. "I know, Daddy. You told me 3 times already. Smart girl. Too smart sometimes." Jonas watched her walk into the school building, her small figure disappearing among the other children, and wondered if he was doing right by her. Sarah would have known what to say about family trees and heaven. Sarah would have made the project into an adventure, complete with stories and maybe even a song. The shop's first customer arrived at 8:30, a regular named Pete, who needed his truck's brakes checked before the storm hit. Jonas lost himself in the familiar rhythm of work, the satisfaction of diagnosing problems and finding solutions. By noon, he'd completed 2 repairs and started on a third, the kind of steady business that kept the lights on, but didn't leave much room for luxuries. The afternoon brought a call from his landlord, Mr. Rodriguez, a reminder that the rent was due in 3 days. Jonas stared at the calendar, calculating and recalculating numbers that stubbornly refused to add up in his favor. The heating bill had been higher than expected, and Maisie had outgrown her winter boots. Again. "You're a good man, Jonas," Rodriguez had said. "I know you're doing your best, but I got my own bills to pay." The words weren't unkind, but they carried the weight of reality. Jonas had always prided himself on meeting his obligations, on being the kind of man whose word meant something. The idea of disappointing people who counted on him sat heavy in his chest as the day wore on. The promised snow began to fall, light at first, then with increasing intensity. Jonas watched through the shop's grimy windows as the flakes danced in the wind, beautiful and ominous in equal measure. The Weather Service had upgraded their warnings, predicting 8 to 12 inches by morning, by 4 o'clock. Jonas was alone in the shop, having sent his part-time helper home early. The smart thing would be to close up himself, to collect Maisie and hunker down for the storm. But the smart thing was a luxury he couldn't afford, not when every hour of work meant another dollar toward keeping their small world intact. The sound of an engine struggling in the cold reached him just As he was considering calling it a day, through the swirling snow, he could make out the headlights of a vehicle approaching the shop. Jonas wiped his hands on a rag and stepped outside, squinting against the wind. The truck that limped into his parking area was expensive, one of those luxury models that cost more than Jonas made in a year. But it was also clearly in distress, steam rising from under the hood, and an ominous grinding sound coming from somewhere in the engine compartment. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out, her designer coat immediately inadequate against the mountain wind. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back severely, and an expression that suggested she was accustomed to being in control of her circumstances. Right now, though, she looked anything but in control. "Are you open?" she called out, having to raise her voice over the wind. Jonas nodded, gesturing toward the warmth of the shop. "Come on in out of the weather. Let's see what we can do for you." As she approached, Jonas noticed things. The cut of her clothes, the subtle confidence in her bearing, despite the obvious frustration, the way she seemed to take in every detail of his modest operation. She was clearly from somewhere else, somewhere with better heating and newer everything. "I'm Clare," she said, extending a gloved hand. "Clare Davis. I was trying to make it through to Denver when this happened." "Jonas Hale," he replied, shaking her hand. "Bad night to be on the roads. Storm's supposed to get worse before it gets better." Clare glanced back at her truck, then at the snow that was already beginning to accumulate on the ground. "How long do you think it might take to fix whatever's wrong?" Jonas pulled on his jacket and grabbed a flashlight. "Let's take a look first. Then we'll talk timeline." The diagnosis didn't take long. The radiator had taken a hit from road debris, probably a rock kicked up by another vehicle. The damage was repairable, but it would require parts that Jonas didn't have in stock, and in this weather, getting them delivered would be a challenge. "I'm afraid you're looking at a couple of days, maybe more," he told her, watching her face carefully. "The storm's going to shut down deliveries, and I don't have the parts on hand." Clare was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Jonas had seen this look before, the moment when people realized that money and influence couldn't change the basic facts of mechanical failure and mountain weather. "Is there somewhere in town I could stay?" she asked finally. "Hotels booked. Solid with folks who got caught by the storm," Jonas said. "This time of year, with the ski season and all, rooms are hard to come by, even in good weather." He looked at her standing there in her expensive coat, clearly out of her element, but handling it with more grace than some might have managed. Something about her reminded him of Sarah's quiet strength, the way she'd faced adversity with dignity rather than complaint. "I've got a spare room above the shop," he heard himself saying. "It's not fancy, but it's warm and clean. You're welcome to it until we can get your truck sorted out." Clare looked surprised, as if kindness from strangers wasn't something she encountered often. "I couldn't impose like that." "No imposition," Jonas said, meaning it. "Around here, we look after each other, especially when the weather turns nasty." She studied his face, perhaps looking for some ulterior motive, and finding none. "That's very generous of you, Mr. Hale. I accept." As Jonas led her up the narrow stairs to the spare room, he wondered what Sarah would think of him taking in. Stranger during a storm. Probably that he was doing exactly what she'd have done herself. The thought brought a smile to his face as he switched on the lamp and showed Clare where she could find extra blankets. Outside, the wind howled with increasing fury, and the snow continued to fall. Neither of them knew it yet, but this storm would change everything, setting in motion events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, trust, and the courage required to build something real in an uncertain world. The spare room above the shop held the lingering scent of motor oil and the faint sweetness of the pine boards Jonas had used to finish the walls himself. Clare stood in the doorway, taking in the simple furnishings. A single bed with a handmaid, quilt, a wooden dresser that had seen better decades, and a small window that offered a view of the snow-covered mountains. It was a far cry from the luxury hotels she was accustomed to, yet something about the space felt honest in a way that five-star accommodations rarely managed. "The bathroom's down the hall," Jonas said, setting her overnight bag on the dresser. "Towels are in the closet. I'll be downstairs for another hour or so if you need anything." Clare nodded, pulling off her gloves and noticing how the cold had numbed her fingers despite their expensive leather. "Thank you again, Mr. Hale. This is really above and beyond." "Jonas," he corrected with a slight smile. "And like I said, it's what neighbors do." After he left, Clare sat on the edge of the bed and really looked at her surroundings for the first time since her truck had started smoking on the mountain highway. The quilt beneath her hands was clearly handmade, each stitch placed with care and attention. The dresser held a small collection of books, their spines worn smooth by countless readings. Everything in the room spoke of a life lived deliberately, where possessions were chosen for their utility and meaning rather than their ability to impress. Her phone buzzed insistently, displaying a string of missed calls and urgent messages from her assistant, her board of directors, and various department heads. The outside world was demanding her attention, as it always did, but for the first time in months, Clare felt no urgency to respond. The storm had given her something she hadn't realized she needed: permission to be unreachable. She moved to the window and watched Jonas below, clearing snow from around the disabled vehicles in his lot with methodical determination. His movements were efficient, economical, the actions of a man who understood that honest work was its own reward. When was the last time she'd watched someone work with such purpose, without calculating the cost-benefit ratio of every gesture? Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, and Clare barely recognized the woman looking back. Somewhere in the climb to the top of the tech world, she'd lost track of the person she'd once been, the idealistic college student who'd believed technology could bring people together rather than isolate them behind screens and algorithms. A sharp knock on the outside door pulled her from her thoughts. She heard Jonas's voice, and another man's, their words indistinct but carrying the easy familiarity of old friendship. Clare found herself drawn to eavesdrop, not from nosiness, but from genuine curiosity about this world she'd stumbled into. "Storm's getting worse, Jonas," the visitor was saying. "Radio says we might see 2 feet before it's done." "Road crews won't be able to keep up with that," Jonas replied. "Good thing most folks had sense enough to stock up before it hit." "Most folks," the other man chuckled. "Though I saw you taking in a stranger with out-of-state plates. That's your good deed." "For the day?" Clare stiffened, suddenly aware that her presence hadn't gone unnoticed by the community. In her world, anonymity was purchased with money and carefully managed public relations. Here, apparently, a stranded traveler was noteworthy enough to generate conversation. "Woman's truck broke down," Jonas said simply. "Couldn't leave her sitting in this weather." "Course not. Sarah always said you'd give away your last dollar if someone needed it more." The mention of Sarah sent a pang through Clare's chest. She'd noticed the wedding ring Jonas still wore, the photographs in the cabin. That spoke of loss and enduring love. Here was a man who'd known real partnership, the kind of connection Clare had spent years trying to replicate through dating apps and algorithms. Always coming up empty after the visitor left, Clare made her way downstairs, drawn by the warmth. Radiating from a small space heater Jonas had set up near his workbench. He looked up from the engine manual he was studying, snow melting from his hair where he'd been outside. "Everything comfortable upstairs?" he asked. "More than comfortable," Clare said truthfully. "I hope I'm not putting you out of your routine." Jonas shook his head. "Routine's overrated anyway. Besides, Maisie will be thrilled to have someone new to talk to. She gets bored with just me for company." "Maisie?" "My daughter. She's 7, and she has more questions than a room full of reporters." Jonas's face softened when he spoke of his child, revealing a tenderness that was striking in its unguarded honesty. "She's staying with a neighbor tonight, since the roads are too bad for me to pick her up from school." Claire felt a stab of something she couldn't quite name. Envy, perhaps, for the simplicity of a love that asked for nothing more than presence and attention. It must be challenging, raising her on your own. "Has its moments," Jonas admitted, closing the manual. "But she's the best thing I ever helped make. Can't imagine life without her chatter filling up the quiet spaces." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the storm raging outside while warmth gradually filled the small space between them. Claire found herself studying Jonas's hands as he organized his tools, noting the careful precision of his movements, the way he treated even simple implements with respect. "I should call the parts supplier," Jonas said, reaching for his phone. "See when we might expect delivery once this weather clears." A conversation was brief and not particularly encouraging. Road closures would likely extend through the weekend, and even priority deliveries were being postponed indefinitely. Jonas relayed this information to Claire with an apologetic shrug. That suggested he was accustomed to circumstances beyond his control. "I'm in no hurry," Claire lied smoothly. The truth was more complicated. She had board meetings, product launches, 1,000 urgent decisions that couldn't wait for mountain weather to improve. Yet sitting in this warm shop, watching snow accumulate against the windows, she felt no desire to rush back to that world of constant demands and calculated interactions. "You sure about that?" Jonas asked, studying her face with perceptive eyes. "Most folks driving trucks like yours have places to be, people expecting them." Claire felt heat rise in her cheeks. Nothing that can't wait a few days. The lie came. Easily, polished by years of managing her public image, but something in Jonas's direct gaze made her want to tell him the truth about everything. "I was taking some time away from work, a spontaneous road trip." It wasn't entirely false. She had left San Francisco without advance notice, driving instead of flying for the first time in years. The board thought she was at a spa retreat, disconnected by design. They had no idea she was testing whether authentic connection was possible when stripped of wealth, status, and the carefully curated persona that had become her prison. "Sometimes we all need to step away from what we think we're supposed to be doing," Jonas said with surprising insight. "Figure out what we actually want to be doing." The words hit closer to home than he could have known. Claire had built an empire on the promise of helping people find meaningful connections, yet her own life had become a masterclass in isolation. Every relationship was filtered through calculations of advantage and risk, every interaction measured against potential impact on her carefully constructed image. "What about you?" she asked, deflecting attention from her own circumstances. "Do you ever think about doing something different?" Jonas considered the question seriously, as he seemed to consider everything. "Used to dream about expanding this beyond business, maybe opening a second location down in the valley. Sarah and I had plans." He trailed off, lost in memories. "These days, I mostly just focus on keeping what we have. Making sure Maisie has what she needs." "That's admirable, is it?" Jonas's smile was rueful. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm just scared to want more." Easier to tell yourself you're being practical than admit you might not be brave enough to try. The honesty in his admission struck Claire like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had spoken to her with such unguarded truth? In her world, every conversation was performed, every revelation calculated for maximum effect. Jonas's willingness to show vulnerability without agenda was both refreshing and terrifying. The power flickered, drawing their attention to the lights overhead. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving snow against the windows with increasing force. The storm that had brought them together was intensifying, making it clear that Claire's stay would extend well beyond a single night. "I should check the generator," Jonas said, moving toward a door Claire hadn't noticed before. Lost power for 3 days last winter. Learned to be prepared after that. Clare watched him work, noting the competence with which he approached every task. There was something deeply attractive about a man who could solve problems with his hands, who understood the physical world in ways that her digital expertise couldn't match. She realized she was staring and forced herself to look away, but not before Jonas caught her observation. Their eyes met across the small space, and Clare felt something shift between them. Not the practiced chemistry of her usual encounters, but something raw and unexpected. The recognition that despite their different worlds, they were both people who'd lost their way and were trying to find it again. "Clare Davis," Jonas said, slowly, as if testing the weight of her name. "That's an interesting coincidence." "Coincidence?" "Davis was my mother's maiden name." His smile was gentle but knowing. "Funny how often people pick names that mean something to them, even when they're trying to hide." Clare's breath caught. He knew she was lying, or at least suspected it, yet he wasn't pressing for details. Instead, he was offering her the gift of privacy while gently acknowledging the deception between them. It was a kind of grace she hadn't expected and didn't deserve. Sometimes we need time to figure out who we really are before we can tell anyone our real name, she said carefully. Jonas nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Well then, Clare Davis, looks like you'll have plenty of time to figure things out. This storm's not going anywhere soon." As if to punctuate his words, the lights flickered again, and the wind howled with renewed fury around the building. Clare pulled her coat tighter and realized that for the first time in years, she was exactly where she wanted to be, even if she couldn't yet admit why. Clare woke to the sound of snow sliding off the roof in great, muffled thumps. Pale morning light filtered through the small window, revealing a world transformed overnight into something pristine and hushed. She'd slept better than she had in months, despite the unfamiliar surroundings and the constant whisper of wind around the building's corners. The scent of coffee drifted up from downstairs, rich and welcoming. Clare checked her phone, still no signal, which meant the outside world remained blissfully unreachable. For a woman whose life was measured in minutes and managed by the second, the enforced disconnection felt like stepping into a parallel universe where time moved differently. She dressed quickly in yesterday's clothes, wishing she'd packed more practical attire for her spontaneous journey. The designer jeans and cashmere sweater that had seemed appropriate for a quick drive through scenic mountain towns now felt foolishly inadequate for her current circumstances. Downstairs, she found Jonas at his workbench, a steaming mug beside him as he studied what appeared to be technical drawings. He looked up when she appeared, offering a smile that seemed genuinely pleased to see her. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's fresh if you'd like some." Fair warning, though it's strong enough to wake the dead. "Perfect," Clare said, gratefully accepting the mug he poured for her. The coffee was indeed robust, with none of the subtle complexity of her usual artisanal blends, but it warmed her from the inside out in a way that felt more necessary than luxurious. "How much snow did we get?" she asked, moving to peer out the window. 18 inches, and still coming down. "Radio says the main roads won't be cleared until tomorrow at the earliest." Jonas joined her at the window, close enough that she could catch the faint scent of soap and motor oil that seemed to define him. "I called about those parts for your truck. Won't be able to get them until next week, assuming the delivery trucks can make it up the mountain." Clare absorbed this information with surprising equanimity. A week ago, being stranded anywhere for multiple days would have sent her into a panic of rescheduled meetings and crisis management. Now, the prospect felt more like a gift than a disaster. "I hope this isn't putting you out terribly," she said. "Not at all. Truth is, it's nice to have some company. Gets quiet around here during storms." Before Clare could respond, the sound of stamping feet and muffled voices came from outside. The door burst open, letting in a swirl of snow and cold air, followed by a small figure bundled in so many layers that only bright eyes and a red nose were visible. "Daddy!" The child called, out, immediately launching into Jonas's arms, despite the snow coating her outer layers. "Mrs. Henderson says the snow is taller than me in some places." "I believe it, sweetheart," Jonas said, helping to unwrap the small person from her winter gear. As layers came off, a girl emerged with dark hair and pigtails, and her father's thoughtful eyes. "Maisie, I'd like you to meet Miss Clare. Her truck broke down in the storm, so she's staying with us for a few days." Maisie turned her attention to Clare with the frank curiosity of childhood, studying her with unabashed interest. "Are you from the city? You dress like the ladies in Daddy's magazines." "Maisie," Jonas said with gentle reproof, though his eyes held amusement. "It's okay," Clare said, crouching down to Maisie's level. "Yes, I am from the city, a big one called San Francisco. Have you ever been to a city?" "No, but I've seen them on TV. Are they really as loud as they look?" Clare considered the question seriously. "Some parts are very loud, but there are quiet places too, like parks and libraries. Though nothing as quiet as it is here in the mountains." Maisie nodded sagely, apparently satisfied with this explanation. "Do you want to see my snow angel? I made it this morning before Mrs. Henderson brought Emmy home. I'd love to see it." The next few minutes were spent bundled back into coats and boots, following Maisie's excited chatter as she led them to the backyard behind the cabin. The snow angel was indeed impressive, carefully crafted with attention to detail that spoke of a child who took her creative endeavors seriously. "It's beautiful," Clare said, meaning it. "You're very artistic." Maisie beamed at the praise. "Daddy says I get that from Mommy. She used to paint pictures of the mountains." The child's matter-of-fact delivery of this information about her deceased mother hit Clare unexpectedly hard. There was such resilience in the way Maisie spoke of loss, such acceptance of a reality that would devastate most adults. "I'm sure your mommy would be very proud of your snow angel," Clare said softly. "She would," Maisie agreed with absolute certainty. "Daddy, can Miss Clare help us make pancakes? Mrs. Henderson gave me maple syrup from her tree." Jonas looked to Clare questioningly. "If you don't mind kitchen duty, I'd be happy for the help. Cooking's not exactly my strongest skill." "I'd love to help," Clare found herself saying, though. She couldn't remember the last time she'd actually cooked anything more complicated than reheating takeout. The kitchen in the cabin was small but efficient, and Clare quickly discovered that cooking with Maisie involved more chaos than actual food preparation. The 7-year-old had strong opinions about pancake batter consistency and an alarming tendency to use more ingredients than the recipe called for. "More vanilla," Maisie declared, reaching for the bottle before Clare could stop her. "Easy there, sweetheart," Jonas said, catching the bottle mid-pour. "Miss Clare might not be used to our cooking style." "What's your cooking style?" Clare asked, watching father and daughter work together with practiced ease. "Experimental," Jonas said dryly. "We figure if it's edible, it's a success." Clare found herself laughing more genuinely than she had in months. There was something infectious about Maisie's enthusiasm and Jonas's patient humor. The kitchen felt alive in a way her sleek San Francisco apartment never did, filled with the kind of comfortable chaos that spoke of a home rather than just a place to sleep. As they cooked, Clare observed the easy dynamic between father and daughter. Jonas listened to Maisie's constant chatter with the attention most people reserve for important business meetings, responding to her observations about everything from snow density to the proper way to flip pancakes as if her opinions truly mattered to him. "Miss Clare, do you have children?" Maisie asked while they waited for the first batch of pancakes to finish cooking. The question caught Clare off guard. In her world, personal inquiries were carefully navigated, deflected with practiced responses that revealed nothing. But Maisie's guileless curiosity demanded honesty. "No, I don't," Clare said simply. "Why not?" "Maisie," Jonas warned gently, "that's a pretty personal question." "It's okay," Clare said, though she wasn't entirely sure it was. "I guess I've been too busy with work to think about having a family." Maisie considered this with the seriousness she applied to all adult mysteries. "That's too bad. You'd be a good mom. You listen when people talk, and you don't try to fix my pancakes even when I put too much stuff in them." The observation hit Clare with unexpected force. Here was a child who barely knew her, offering insight into her character with the clarity that came from innocence. When was the last time someone had noticed her capacity for patience, her willingness to let others be themselves? "Thank you, Maisie," she said quietly. "That's one of the nicest compliments I've ever received." Breakfast was a revelation in chaos and joy. The pancakes were slightly lumpy and overly sweet. The syrup was sticky on everything it touched, and Maisie managed to get more food on her clothes than in her mouth. Yet Clare couldn't remember enjoying a meal more. Jonas watched his daughter's animated conversation with their guest, noting how naturally Clare engaged with Maisie's endless questions and observations. There was something different about Clare. When she interacted with his daughter, a softness that emerged from beneath the polished exterior, a warmth that suggested depths he was only beginning to glimpse. "Miss Clare, want to see my room?" Maisie asked as they finished eating. "I have a dollhouse that Daddy made for me." "I'd love to see it." Maisie's room was a testament to childhood imagination. Drawings covered the walls, toys filled every available surface, and books were stacked in precarious towers throughout the space. But the centerpiece was indeed the dollhouse, a lovingly crafted miniature home that clearly represented hours of patient work. "Daddy made this after Mommy went to heaven," Maisie explained, manipulating the tiny furniture with careful hands. "He said every little girl should have a perfect house, even if it's just for dolls." Clare knelt beside the dollhouse, marveling at the attention to detail. Every room was fully furnished, complete with miniature family figures and working electric lights. It was the kind of gift that spoke of love, expressed through action, of a father's desire to give his daughter something beautiful in the midst of loss. "Your daddy is very talented," Clare said, running her finger along the tiny handrail of the dollhouse stairs. "He can fix anything," Maisie said with absolute confidence. "Mrs. Peterson's car, Mr. Williams' tractor, even my broken elephant when his trunk came off." The casual way Maisie listed her father's capabilities spoke of a child who'd grown up seeing love expressed through service, through the willingness to solve problems and meet needs without expecting anything in return. It was a far cry from Clare's world, where relationships were often transactional and affection was carefully measured against potential advantage. As they played with the dollhouse, Clare found herself drawn into Maisie's elaborate stories about the miniature family's adventures. There was something healing about engaging with such pure imagination, about entering a world where problems could be solved with creativity and good intentions. "Miss Clare," Maisie said, after they'd arranged the dollhouse furniture for the third time, "are you going to marry my daddy?" The question came out of nowhere, delivered with the casual directness that made children such dangerous conversationalists. Clare felt heat flood her face as she struggled for an appropriate response. "We just met yesterday, sweetheart," she managed. "People usually know each other much longer before they think about things like marriage." "But you like him," Maisie said with the confidence of someone stating an obvious fact. "I can tell because you smile different when he talks." Clare was saved from having to respond by Jonas's voice calling from downstairs, announcing that he was heading out to check on elderly neighbors who might need help with snow removal. The interruption gave her time to collect herself, though she couldn't shake the feeling that a 7-year-old had seen something she wasn't ready to acknowledge, even to herself. The second day of Clare's unexpected stay dawned clear and brilliant. The storm having moved on during the night, to leave behind a world crystallized in white. The morning sun transformed the accumulated snow into a landscape of diamonds, each surface catching and throwing back light with painful beauty. Clare found herself standing at the kitchen window with her second cup of coffee, watching Jonas clear a path to the shop with methodical determination. His movements were economical, practiced, the actions of a man who understood that winter in the mountains demanded respect and preparation. She noticed how he paused periodically to check on Maisie, who was supposedly helping, but seemed more interested in catching snowflakes on her tongue. "He does that every morning after a storm," Maisie said, appearing at Clare's elbow with her own cup of hot chocolate. "Says the paths won't clear themselves, and neighbors might need to get through. He takes care of a lot of people, doesn't he?" "Everybody," Maisie said with matter-of-fact pride. "Mrs. Chun down the road calls him her guardian angel. And Mr. Rodriguez says Daddy's the most dependable man in 3 counties. Clare absorbed this information while watching Jonas work. In her world, success was measured by market share and profit margins, by the ability to disrupt industries and accumulate wealth. Here was a different kind of success, measured in relationships maintained and problem solved, in the quiet satisfaction of being needed and useful. "Miss Clare, can you braid hair?" Maisie asked, holding up a brush. "Mine always gets tangled when I sleep." "I can try," Clare said, though her experience with children's hairstyles was limited to watching her assistant manage her own daughter's morning routine. They settled on the couch, Maisie chattering contentedly while Clare worked, her fingers through the dark tangles. There was something meditative about the simple task, something that connected her to generations of women who performed this same ritual of care and attention. "Daddy tries to do my hair," Maisie explained, "but he's not very good at it. He can fix engines and build dollhouses, but hair is too complicated." "Everyone has different talents," Clare said, attempting something that might charitably be called a French braid. "Your daddy seems to have quite a few of them. Do you have talents?" Clare paused in her braiding, considering the question. What were her talents, really? She could read market trends, manage complex organizations, and turn ideas into profitable ventures. But sitting here with a 7-year-old's hair between her fingers, those abilities felt abstract and distant. "I'm good with computers," she said finally. "And I help people connect with each other, like making friends." "Something like that." Maisie twisted around to look at her with serious eyes. "Are you good at making friends for yourself?" The question was so perceptive, so cutting in its innocence, that Clare felt her breath catch. This child saw too much, understood too clearly the difference between professional competence and personal fulfillment. "I'm working on it," Clare said honestly. Jonas stamped his feet on the porch before entering, bringing with him the sharp scent of cold air and pine. His cheeks were reddened from the wind, and snow clung to his jacket, but his eyes held the satisfaction of work completed. "Paths are clear," he announced, hanging his coat on a peg by the door. "Should be able to get the truck out if we need to make a supply run later." "Miss Clare braided my hair," Maisie announced, turning to display Clare's handiwork. "It's not as good as Mommy used to do, but it's better than when you try." Jonas examined the braid with mock seriousness. "I have to agree with that assessment. Miss Clare clearly has hidden talents." The compliment was casual, throwaway, but it warmed Clare more than it should have. When was the last time someone had noticed her efforts at something so simple, so human? Her successes were usually measured in headlines and stock prices, not in the successful taming of a 7-year-old's bedhead. "I was thinking," Jonas said, settling into his favorite chair, "since we're all stuck here together, maybe Miss Clare would like to learn a thing or two about how engines work. Might come in handy if her truck ever acts up again." "I'd like that," Clare said, surprised to find she meant it. "I've never really understood how cars work. Always seemed like magic to me." "No magic involved," Jonas said with a smile. just understanding how pieces fit together and what happens when they don't. The impromptu mechanics lesson began in the shop, with Clare bundled into a borrowed jacket that smelled like Jonas and hung loose on her smaller frame. The garage was warmer than she'd expected, heated by a combination of space heaters, and the residual warmth from yesterday's work. Jonas began with basics, showing her how to check oil levels and tire pressure, explaining each step with the patience of someone accustomed to teaching. His hands guided hers as they examined various components, and Clare found herself acutely aware of his proximity, the solid warmth of his presence beside her. "The thing about engines," Jonas said, pointing to various parts under the hood of a customer's truck, "is that they're honest. They tell you exactly what's wrong if you know how to listen." "How do you listen to an engine?" "Same way you listen to people, I suppose. Pay attention to what they're actually saying instead of what you expect to hear." Clare looked at him sharply, wondering if there was deeper meaning in his words, but his attention was focused on demonstrating how to check brake fluid levels. Still, she filed the observation away, recognizing wisdom when she heard it. "Now you try," Jonas said, stepping back to give her room to work. Clare approached the engine with careful concentration, trying to remember everything he'd shown her. Her hands, soft from years of keyboard work and professional manicures, felt clumsy on the mechanical components, but Jonas's quiet encouragement kept her from giving up. "That's it," he said when she successfully identified a worn belt. "You're getting the hang of it." The praise was simple, unadorned, but it created a warmth in Clare's chest that had nothing to do with the shop's heating system. When was the last time someone had celebrated her learning something new, rather than expecting her to already know everything? They worked together for the better part of an hour, Jonas explaining while Clare practiced. She found herself genuinely interested in the mechanical relationships he described, the way each component depended on others to function properly. There was something appealing about problems that could be diagnosed and fixed, about a world where solutions were concrete and measurable. "You're a natural at this," Jonas said, as they cleaned their hands with industrial soap. "Most people get frustrated when they don't pick it up immediately." "I like puzzles," Clare admitted. "There's something satisfying about figuring out how things work." "What kind of puzzles do you work on in your regular life?" The question was casual, but Clare heard the genuine curiosity beneath it. Jonas was trying to understand her, to fit her into the context of his world and experience. The problem was that her real life bore no resemblance to anything he would recognize as normal or relatable. "Business problems, mostly," she said carefully. "How to make complicated systems work better. Sounds important? Sometimes it feels important, other times." She trailed off, realizing she was about to reveal more than was safe. "Other times it's hard to see how it connects to real life." Jonas nodded as if he understood exactly what she meant. "Sarah used to say that about my army work. All those missions that seemed crucial at the time, but when I came home, they felt like they belonged to someone else's life." "You were in the army?" 12 years. Started right out of high school. Figured I'd make it a career. But then Sarah got pregnant with Maisie, and suddenly having a safe, predictable life seemed more important than adventure." Clare heard the note of wistfulness in his voice, the acknowledgement of paths not taken. "Do you ever regret the choice?" "Not for a second," Jonas said without hesitation. "Being Maisie's dad is the best job I've ever had, even when it's the hardest." They were interrupted by Maisie herself, who burst through the shop door with the dramatic flair of someone making an important announcement. "Daddy," Mrs. Peterson called. "Her cat is stuck in the big pine tree behind her house, and the fire department says they can't come until the roads are better." Jonas sighed, but his expression held more amusement than annoyance. "I suppose Rocky got spooked by the snow and climbed higher than he could get back down. Can you rescue him?" Maisie asked with the absolute confidence that her father could solve any problem presented to him. "I can try." "Miss Clare, feel like participating in a cat rescue mission?" Clare found herself nodding, before she'd fully considered what she was agreeing to. "I've never rescued a cat before." "First time for everything," Jonas said, already reaching for his coat. The Peterson house was a short walk through the cleared paths, and Mrs. Peterson herself was a tiny woman in her 70s who greeted Jonas like a beloved nephew. Rocky, a large orange tabby, was indeed stranded about 20 feet up in the pine tree, yowling pathetically and showing no inclination to attempt a descent. "He's been up there since the storm started," Mrs. Peterson explained. "Stubborn creature won't listen to reason." Jonas studied the tree with the same analytical approach he brought to mechanical problems. "I can get up there, but I'll need someone to steady the ladder and maybe help coax him down once I reach him." "I can do that," Claire said, though she'd never considered herself particularly good with animals. The next 20 minutes provided a masterclass in patience and problem solving. Jonas climbed carefully, speaking softly to the increasingly agitated cat, while Claire held the ladder and offered what she hoped were encouraging words. When Rocky finally allowed himself to be gathered into Jonas's arms, the relief was palpable. "You're a lifesaver, Jonas," Mrs. Peterson said, cradling her rescued pet. "I don't know what this neighborhood would do without you." Walking back to the shop, Claire found herself reflecting on what she just witnessed. In her world, problems were solved through delegation and financial resources. Here, they were solved through personal investment and practical skills. Both approaches had their place, but she was beginning to understand which one built actual communities. "Does this happen often?" she asked Jonas. "Cat rescues? Maybe once a month. But something always needs fixing or helping or finding." He shrugged, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "That's what neighbors do." As they approached the shop, Claire realized that something fundamental was shifting inside her. The life she'd built in San Francisco, successful, controlled, efficient, was beginning to feel like an elaborate performance rather than an authentic existence. Here, watching Jonas navigate his world with quiet competence and genuine care, she was glimpsing an alternative she'd never considered. The question was whether she had the courage to explore what that alternative might mean for someone like her, someone whose entire identity was built on achievements and accomplishments that suddenly seemed far less important than the ability to rescue cats and braid little girls' hair on a snowy morning. The third morning brought a discovery that shifted the tenor of Claire's stay from temporary inconvenience to something approaching genuine refuge. While searching for coffee filters in Jonas's kitchen cabinets, she'd come across a small wooden box tucked behind the everyday dishes. When Maisie noticed her curiosity, the child had matter-of-factly explained that it contained her mother's recipes, written in careful script on index cards yellowed with age and use. "Daddy keeps them safe," Maisie had said with the gravity children, reserved for important family artifacts. "Sometimes we try to make Mommy's cookies, but they never taste quite right." Now, as Claire sat at the small kitchen table with the box open before her, she felt like an archaeologist examining the remnants of a life lived with intention and love. Each recipe card told a story: Sarah's famous apple pie, Jonas's favorite, or Maisie's birthday pancakes, extra vanilla, just like she likes. The handwriting was feminine but strong, with little notes in the margins: add cinnamon if feeling adventurous, or don't overmix, Dad's mistake every time. Jonas found her there an hour later, the cards spread across the table like a personal museum exhibition. He paused in the doorway, coffee mug halfway to his lips, and Claire saw something flicker across his face, not anger, but a vulnerability so raw it made her chest ache. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, beginning to gather the cards. Maisie showed me where they were, and I got curious. "I didn't mean to invade your privacy." "It's okay," Jonas said, though his voice carried a careful restraint. She loved to cook. Always said food was how she showed love when words weren't enough. Claire held up a card for something called Healing Soup for when hearts are heavy. The recipe included unconventional ingredients, like 1 cup of patience and a generous handful of hope, alongside more traditional elements like chicken broth and vegetables. She had a sense of humor, Clare observed. She did. Jonas settled into the chair across from her, his expression softening. Used to say that recipes were just suggestions anyway, that the real secret was paying attention to what people needed. What did you need? The question slipped out before Clare could stop it, too personal and probing for their still tentative friendship. But Jonas considered it seriously, as he seemed to consider everything. Grounding, I think. I was all restless energy back then, always looking for the next mission or challenge. Sarah taught me how to be still, how to find purpose in ordinary moments. He picked up one of the recipe cards, running his thumb over the faded ink. After she died, I kept waiting for that feeling to come back. The sense that what I was doing mattered in some larger way. And has it? Some days. When Maisie laughs at something I've said, or when I fix something that really needed fixing. But other days. He set the card down carefully. Other days I wonder if I'm just going through the motions, waiting for real life to start again. Clare felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition so sharp it was almost painful. Here was someone else who understood the difference between existing and living, between competence and fulfillment. In her carefully constructed world, she'd become an expert at the former while losing sight of the latter entirely. I think I understand that feeling, she said quietly. Jonas looked at her with new attention, perhaps hearing something in her voice that suggested deeper currents beneath her polished surface. What do you do when you're not stranded in mountain towns? The question was inevitable, and Clare had been dreading it since her arrival. Every conversation brought them closer to the moment when she'd have to choose between continued deception and dangerous honesty. The problem was that she was beginning to care too much about Jonas's opinion to lie easily, yet too afraid of his reaction to tell the complete truth. I work in technology, she said carefully. Software development, mostly. Trying to help people connect with each other through digital platforms. It wasn't entirely a lie, though it was such a sanitized version of her actual role that it felt dishonest anyway. Jonas nodded as if this explained something about her that he'd been puzzling over. That why you seem so comfortable being disconnected from everything? He asked. Most people are climbing the walls by now without their phones and internet. Clare realized he was right. She'd barely thought about her usual digital dependencies since arriving, and when she did remember them, it was with relief rather than anxiety. I suppose I needed a break from all that connection more than I realized. Connection can be exhausting when it's not real, Jonas observed with startling insight. All surface, no depth. Like being hungry all the time, even though you're eating, constantly. The metaphor hit so close to home that Clare felt exposed, as if Jonas could see through all her carefully maintained pretenses to the loneliness beneath. This was exactly what she'd been trying to escape, the sense that despite being constantly connected to thousands of people, she was somehow isolated from any genuine human contact. Their conversation was interrupted by Maisie, who bounded into the kitchen with the energy of someone who just made an important discovery. Daddy, I found something in the attic, she announced, holding up a small wooden frame. It's a picture of you when you were a soldier. The photograph showed a younger Jonas in military dress uniform, his face serious beneath the peaked cap, his bearing straight and proud. Clare studied the image, noting the subtle differences between this man and the one sitting across from her. The younger Jonas looked determined, focused on some distant goal. The current version carried a different kind of strength, tempered by loss and softened by love. You look very official, Clare said, handing the photograph back to Maisie. Daddy was important in the army, Maisie said with pride. He had medals and everything. But he says being my daddy is more important than being a soldier. Jonas's slight embarrassment at his daughter's boasting was endearing, but Clare found herself genuinely curious about this chapter of his life. The military bearing was still there in his posture, in the way he approached problems with systematic analysis and decisive action. "What did you do in the army?" she asked. "Special operations," Jonas said simply. "Nothing too exciting. Mostly training other soldiers, some overseas deployments when they needed experienced personnel." Maisie, clearly familiar with this modest deflection, provided additional context. "Mrs. Patterson says Daddy was a hero, and that's why he has the special tags with his name on them." Clare saw Jonas wince slightly at his daughter's revelation. He was clearly uncomfortable with heroic narratives, preferring to downplay his service rather than celebrate it. Yet another indication of his character, the kind of man who did difficult things without needing recognition or praise. "It was a job," Jonas said firmly. "Important work, but nothing that makes me special compared to anyone else who serves." After Maisie had been distracted by other treasures from the attic, Clare and Jonas found themselves alone again with the recipe. Cards still scattered between them. The afternoon light slanted through the kitchen window, creating patterns of warmth and shadow that made the small space feel intimate and safe. "Can I ask you something?" Clare said, gathering courage for a question that had been building since she'd arrived. "Shoot. Do you ever think about leaving here? Starting over somewhere else?" Jonas was quiet for a long moment, considering not just the question, but perhaps the motivation behind it. "I used to," he admitted. "Right after Sarah died, I thought maybe a fresh start would be easier. Somewhere without so many memories." "What changed your mind?" "Maisie, mostly. This is her home, the place where her mother lived and loved her. Seemed wrong to take that away just because I was having trouble figuring out how to keep going." He paused, studying Clare's face. "But also, I realized that running away from grief doesn't actually solve anything. It just gives you the same problems in a different location." The wisdom in his words stung because Clare recognized the truth of them. Wasn't that exactly what she'd been doing with her spontaneous road trip? Running from the suffocating emptiness of her successful life, hoping that geography might provide solutions that introspection had failed to deliver? "Sometimes running away isn't about escaping problems," she said carefully. "Sometimes it's about finding out who you are when you're not defined by your circumstances." Jonas looked at her with sharp attention, perhaps sensing that they were no longer speaking in generalities. "And who are you, Clare Davis, when you're not defined by your circumstances?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made Clare's pulse quicken. Here was her opportunity to tell him the truth, to explain about her real life and the complicated motivations that had brought her to his doorstep. But the risk felt enormous, not just of his judgment, but of losing this fragile connection that had become more precious to her than she'd expected. "I'm still figuring that out," she said finally, which was perhaps the most honest thing she'd said since arriving. Jonas nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Well, you've got time to work on it. Parts won't be here until at least Monday, and that's assuming the delivery trucks can make it up the mountain." Instead of anxiety, Clare felt a profound sense of relief at this news. More time in this small cabin with its honest emotions and simple routines. More time to explore what it might mean to live a life measured by relationships rather than achievements. More time to understand the growing feeling that she'd stumbled into, something she'd been searching for without knowing it. That evening, as they sat around the small table, sharing a dinner assembled from pantry ingredients and leftover goodwill, Clare watched Jonas help Maisie with her homework and felt something settle into place inside her chest. For the first time in years, she wasn't planning the next day's agenda or calculating the optimal outcome of current decisions. She was simply present, engaged in the immediate moment with people who valued her presence rather than her productivity. It was a dangerous feeling, this contentment, because it made her question everything she'd built her life around. and suggested possibilities she wasn't sure she was brave enough to pursue. The fourth day dawned with a clarity that made the mountain peaks look close enough to touch. Claire woke to find her phone finally showing a weak signal, and with it, a cascade of missed calls, urgent emails, and increasingly frantic messages from her assistant. The outside world had found her again, and with it came the crushing weight of responsibilities she'd been blissfully ignoring. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, scrolling through the messages with growing unease. Her board was scheduled to meet in 2 days to discuss the quarterly earnings report. 3 major partnerships were awaiting her approval. A competitor had launched a new feature that was already generating industry buzz. The carefully orchestrated machinery of her business empire was beginning to show signs of strain without her constant attention. Claire closed her eyes and tried to summon the urgency that would normally drive her to immediate action. Instead, she found herself thinking about yesterday evening, when Jonas had taught Maisie to play chess using a wooden set he'd carved himself years ago. The patient way he'd explained each piece's movement, the delight on Maisie's face when she'd captured her first pawn, the quiet satisfaction in his expression as he'd watched his daughter master something new when had her own accomplishments, stopped bringing that kind of genuine joy? When had success become something she pursued out of habit rather than passion? Downstairs, she found Jonas already at work in the shop, his movements focused and economical as he rebuilt an engine with the same care others might reserve for delicate artwork. Steam rose from his coffee mug in the cold air, and morning light filtered through the grimy windows to illuminate dust motes dancing around his head like tiny halos. "Morning," he said without looking up from his work. "Sleep well?" "Well enough," Claire said, though she'd actually slept better here than she had in her own bed for months. "My phone's working again." Something in her tone must have conveyed her ambivalence because Jonas paused in his work to study her face. That good news or bad news? Both, I think. Claire moved closer, watching his hands as they worked with tools she was beginning to recognize. The outside world is very persistent about demanding attention. It usually is. Jonas straightened, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better decades. "Important things waiting for you?" Claire considered the question seriously. Were they important? A board meeting, the partnerships, the competitive pressures, they all felt significant from within the context of her business world. But sitting here in Jonas's shop, surrounded by the honest satisfaction of work that produced tangible results, those urgent matters seemed oddly abstract. "They seem important," she said carefully, "but I'm starting to wonder if there's a difference between things that feel urgent and things that actually matter." Jonas nodded as if this was a distinction he'd considered before. Sarah used to say that the loudest voice in the room isn't always the one worth listening to. Before Claire could respond, Maisie burst through the door with a dramatic entrance. That seemed to be her signature style. Her cheeks were red from the cold, and snow clung to her jacket from whatever outdoor adventure had occupied her morning. "Daddy, Mrs. Chun needs help with her furnace again," she announced. "She says it's making the scary noise like last time." Jonas sighed, but reached for his coat without hesitation. "That furnace has been on its last legs for 3 winters. I keep telling her to replace it, but she's worried about the cost. Can you fix it?" Maisie asked with the automatic confidence children had in their parents' abilities. "I can try. Might need to get creative with the parts, though." Jonas looked to Claire. "Want to come along? Mrs. Chun makes the best hot chocolate in 3 counties, and she'd love to meet you properly." Claire found herself nodding, drawn by the prospect of witnessing more of Jonas's quiet competence and curious about the community that had clearly adopted him as their unofficial problem-solver. Mrs. Chun's house was a modest ranch that spoke of decades of careful maintenance and loving attention. The elderly woman herself was tiny but formidable, greeting Jonas with a mixture of gratitude and gentle scolding that suggested a long-standing relationship. "I told you this furnace was getting temperamental," she said, leading them to the basement. "Now it's making noises like an angry dragon." The furnace was indeed ancient, a massive iron beast that belonged in a museum of heating technology. As Jonas examined it with his methodical approach, Clare found herself drawn into conversation with Mrs. Chun, who possessed the kind of direct curiosity that made evasion difficult. "You're the young woman who got stranded at Jonas's place," Mrs. Chun said, settling into a kitchen chair with a cup of tea. "He says you're from San Francisco. What brings you to our little corner of nowhere?" "Just traveling," Clare said, the lie coming easier with repetition. "Taking some time to see the country. Traveling alone? Brave girl, or running from something." Mrs. Chun's eyes held the sharpness of someone who'd seen enough of life to recognize its patterns. Sometimes we need to get lost before we can figure out where we belong. The observation was so perceptive that Clare felt exposed, as if this elderly woman could see through all her careful deflections to the truth beneath. "Have you always lived here?" 63 years come spring. Came here as a young bride. Thought I'd stay a few years and move on to somewhere more exciting." Mrs. Chun's smile held the contentment of someone who'd found unexpected treasure. Turned out this place had excitement enough, just the quieter kind. From the basement came the sound of tools and occasional commentary as Jonas worked on the temperamental furnace. Mrs. Chun listened to these sounds with the attention of someone who'd learned to gauge progress by audio cues alone. "He's a good man, that one," she said quietly. "Lost too much too young. But he's got the kind of strength that bends without breaking. Not many men would have handled what he's been through with such grace. He does seem steady," Clare said, not trusting herself to reveal how much Jonas's character had already begun to matter to her. "Steady, yes, but lonely too, though he'd never admit it. Throws himself into taking care of everyone else so he doesn't have to think about what he needs." Mrs. Chun studied Clare with knowing eyes. Sometimes it takes an outsider to help someone see possibilities they've been too close to notice. Before Clare could respond to this loaded observation, Jonas emerged from the basement with oil-stained hands and a satisfied expression. "Should be good for another winter," he announced. "But Mrs. Chun, you really need to start thinking about a replacement. I can only patch these old systems so many times." "I know, dear. Maybe in the spring when I can think about spending that kind of money without losing sleep." Mrs. Chun patted his arm affectionately. "Now sit down and have some hot chocolate before you head back out into the cold." The next hour passed in comfortable conversation, with Mrs. Chun regaling them with stories of the neighborhood's history, and Jonas contributing occasional commentary that revealed his deep knowledge of a community's characters and relationships. Clare found herself relaxing into the warmth of genuine hospitality, the kind of social interaction that asked for nothing more than presence and attention. When they finally prepared to leave, Mrs. Chun pressed a thermos of leftover hot chocolate into Clare's hands and fixed her with a meaningful look. "You take care of yourself, dear. And remember what I said about sometimes needing to get lost before finding where you belong." Walking back through the snow-covered streets, Clare found herself processing the morning's interactions with growing awareness of how different this community felt from anything in her previous experience. People here seemed to operate on principles of mutual support and genuine care, creating a social fabric that was both stronger and more flexible than the competitive networks she was used to navigating. "Mrs. Chun seems very wise," she said to Jonas. "She's seen a lot of life. Raised 4 kids mostly on her own after her husband died young. Built a successful catering business from her kitchen table. She's got perspective on what matters and what doesn't." "What does she think matters?" Jonas was quiet for a moment, their footsteps crunching in the snow as they made their way home. "People taking care of each other. Work that makes things better, rather than just making money. Time spent on relationships that actually nourish you instead of just advancing your interests. Each item on his list felt like an indictment of Claire's carefully constructed life. Her success had been built on advancing interests rather than nurturing relationships, on making money rather than making things better. The realization was uncomfortable, but not surprising. She'd been feeling the hollowness of her achievements for months without knowing how to address it. "That sounds like a good life," she said quietly. "It can be, though it helps to have people to share it with." There was something in Jonas's tone that made Claire look at him more carefully, but his expression was unreadable as they approached the shop. Her phone buzzed again with another urgent message, and she felt the familiar tension begin to reassemble itself in her shoulders. That evening, as they sat around the small table sharing another improvised meal, Claire found herself watching Jonas and Maisie with a mixture of longing and apprehension. The easy affection between them, the way they moved through their evening routines with practiced coordination, the sense of contentment that pervaded their small home, it all spoke of a kind of life she'd never considered possible for herself. But more unsettling was the growing awareness that she was falling in love with both this life and the man who'd created it. The feeling was dangerous precisely because it was genuine, unmarked by the calculations and strategic considerations that had governed her previous relationships. Here was something that couldn't be managed or optimized, only experienced and treasured. As Maisie chattered about her school project on family trees, Claire realized that somewhere in the past 4 days, she'd begun to imagine herself as part of this small family's story. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying, because it suggested possibilities that would require abandoning everything she'd worked to build. Yet sitting here in the warm glow of the kitchen light, listening to Jonas's patient responses to his daughter's endless questions, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that she'd finally found something worth all the risks that loving it would require. The fifth morning arrived with deceptive calm. The snow had finally stopped, and road crews had managed to clear the main highway enough for essential traffic. Jonas announced over breakfast that the parts for Claire's truck had been located at a supplier 2 towns over, and that he could have her vehicle roadworthy by evening if all went well. The news should have filled Claire with relief. Instead, she felt something close to panic at the prospect of her refuge ending so soon. 5 days ago, she would have been desperate to escape this small mountain community and return to her carefully orchestrated life. Now, the thought of leaving felt like tearing herself away from something essential she'd only just discovered. "That's wonderful," she managed, hoping her voice conveyed appropriate enthusiasm. "I can't thank you enough for everything you've done." Jonas looked at her with the perceptive attention she'd come to expect from him. "You don't sound particularly excited about getting back on the road." "I am, of course. It's just been peaceful here. Sometimes it's hard to leave peaceful places." Maisie, who had been quietly consuming pancakes while listening to the adult conversation, suddenly looked stricken. "You're leaving today?" "It looks that way, sweetheart," Claire said, her heart clenching at the disappointment in the child's voice. "But you can't leave yet. We were going to finish my family tree project together, and you promised to help me teach Daddy how to braid hair properly." Claire had indeed made these promises, small commitments that had seemed natural in the warm cocoon of their shared days. Now they felt like threads connecting her to a life she couldn't claim, obligations she had no right to make. "I'm sure your daddy can help you with those things," she said gently. "It's not the same," Maisie said with the devastating honesty of childhood. "I like having you here. It feels like we're a real family." The words hit Claire like a physical blow. Not because they were manipulative, Maisie was too young for that kind of calculation, but because they articulated something Claire had been afraid to acknowledge even to herself. These 5 days had felt more like family than anything in her previous experience, more real than the carefully managed relationships that populated her successful but solitary life. Rescued them all from the heavy moment by suggesting that Maisie get ready for school while he and Claire worked on the truck repairs. As his daughter reluctantly gathered her backpack, He caught Claire's arm gently. "She gets attached quickly," he said quietly. "Lost her mother so young that any woman who shows her kindness becomes important pretty fast. I hope you don't take it personally." "I don't," Claire said, though she suspected that Maisie's attachment was mutual and entirely personal. "She's a wonderful child. You've done an amazing job with her." Something in Jonas's expression shifted, becoming more intent. "Claire, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "These past few days, being here with us, has it felt as natural to you as it has to me?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications that made Claire's pulse quicken. Here was Jonas, careful and guarded Jonas, admitting to feelings that mirrored her own growing attachment. The honorable thing would be to discourage this line of thinking, to protect him from the disappointment that would inevitably come when he learned who she really was. Instead, she found herself nodding. "More natural than anything has felt in a very long time." Jonas stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, smell the familiar scent of soap and motor oil that had become comforting rather than foreign. "Then maybe we should talk about what that means. About whether this has to end just because your truck gets fixed." Before Claire could respond, the shop door burst open with enough force to rattle the windows. A teenager stumbled in, shaking, snow from his jacket, and pulling earbuds from his ears, with the urgent energy of someone bearing important news. "Mr. Hale, you're not going to believe this," the boy announced, then stopped short when he noticed Claire. "Oh, sorry, didn't know. You had a customer." "It's okay, Jake," Jonas said, though Claire noticed his slight frown at the interruption. "What's got you so excited?" Jake pulled out his phone with the reverent attention teenagers reserved for truly momentous discoveries. "I was just reading the tech news while waiting for Mom to pick me up, and I saw this article about that billionaire lady who founded ConnectFlow, you know, the dating app. Anyway, she's been missing for like a week, and there's all this speculation about whether she's been kidnapped or if she's having some kind of breakdown because her company's stock is tanking." And Jake's words became background noise as Claire felt the world tilt sideways around her. The teenager's phone screen was facing her direction, and she could see her own professional headshot staring back at her from what appeared to be a business news website. The headline read, "ConnectFlow founder Clare Devlin missing. Stock plummets as CEO remains unreachable." "And the crazy thing is," Jake continued, oblivious to the seismic shift occurring in the small shop, "she looks exactly like your guest. Here, I mean, exactly like her. Weird coincidence, right?" The silence that followed Jake's observation was deafening. Claire watched Jonas's face as he processed the information, saw the exact moment when understanding replaced confusion. His expression didn't show anger, exactly, but something worse, a careful blankness that suggested he was reassessing everything he thought he knew about her. "Jake," Jonas said quietly, never taking his eyes off Claire, "why don't you head home? Roads are still pretty slick for walking." "But Mr. Hale, don't you think it's crazy how much she looks like Jake? Home. Now." The teenager finally picked up on the tension in the room and made a hasty exit, leaving Claire and Jonas alone with the truth hanging between them like a live wire. "Claire Devlin," Jonas said slowly, as if testing the weight of her real name. "Not Claire Davis. Jonas, I can explain, can you?" His voice was calm, but Claire could hear the hurt beneath the control. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I've been hosting a billionaire tech mogul who's been lying to me about everything for the past 5 days. Claire felt something crumble inside her chest. This was the moment she'd been dreading, the inevitable collision between her real life and the fantasy she'd been living. "It's not what you think." "What I think," Jonas said carefully, "is that you've been playing some kind of game. Rich ladies slumming it with the simple mountain folk, collecting experiences like souvenirs. Was this all just entertainment for you?" "No." The word came out sharper than Claire intended, edged with desperation. That's not what this was at all. Then what was it? Because the woman I've been getting to know doesn't exist, does she? She's just a character you created for your little adventure. Claire wanted to deny it, to insist that the woman who'd braided Maisie's hair and learned to check oil levels was the real her. But how could she explain that to someone whose entire life was built on authenticity and honesty? How could she make him understand that she'd been hiding from her real identity rather than playing with it? The woman you've gotten to know is real, she said quietly. Maybe more real than I've been in years. But you're right about the lies, Jonas. I did lie to you, and I'm sorry for that. Why? The single word carried a weight of disappointment that made Claire's heart ache. Why lie about who you are? Because I wanted to see if someone could care about me for who I am instead of what I have. Because I'm tired of every relationship being about what I can do for people rather than who I am as a person. The words tumbled out faster than she could organize them, raw and unfiltered. Because I've spent so many years being Claire Devlin, the successful CEO, that I forgot how to be just Claire. Jonas was quiet for a long moment, processing her explanation with the same methodical attention he brought to mechanical problems. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentler, but no less firm. I understand why you might want to escape from that life. But you didn't just hide your identity, Claire. You let me open up to you about Sarah, about my fears and dreams, while you were keeping fundamental truths about yourself secret. How is that fair? The question hit her like a slap because she had no good answer. He was right. She had taken his honesty while offering carefully edited versions of herself in return. The inequality of their emotional exchange made her feel small and selfish in ways that professional criticism never had. It's not fair, she admitted, and I don't know how to make it right. Did any of it mean anything to you? These past few days, the conversations we've had, the way you've been with Maisie, was any of that real? All of it, Claire said immediately. Every moment, every conversation, every feeling, it was all real. More real than anything in my life has been for years. Jonas studied her face as if looking for signs of deception, and Claire forced herself to remain open under his scrutiny. Whatever happened next, she owed him complete honesty, even if it was too late to matter. I believe you, he said finally. But I also think you need to figure out who you actually are before you can have an honest relationship with anyone, including... Jonas, please, your truck will be ready by evening, he said, his tone becoming formal and distant. I'll have the bill ready, and you can be on your way back to your real life. The dismissal was gentle but absolute, and Claire felt something vital break inside her chest. She'd found everything she hadn't known she was looking for, only to lose it through her own cowardice and deception. As Jonas turned back to his work with deliberate focus, Claire realized that the cruelest part of this revelation wasn't his anger, it was his understanding. He knew exactly why she'd lied, which made her lies seem even more unnecessary and destructive. She climbed the stairs to the spare room that had briefly felt like home, knowing that her time in this small sanctuary was ending just as she'd begun. To understand what it could mean to build a life based on love rather than achievement. The question now was whether she had the courage to become the person who deserved that kind of life, and whether it was already too late to matter. The hours that followed Jake's revelation passed with the sluggish weight of a funeral procession. Claire packed her few belongings with mechanical precision, each folded garment feeling like a small goodbye to the life she'd briefly imagined possible. Through the small window, she could see Jonas working on her truck with the same methodical attention he brought to every task. But there was a stiffness in his movements that spoke of carefully controlled emotion. She'd tried twice to approach him, to attempt some kind of explanation that might bridge the chasm her deception had created, but each time he'd found urgent work that required his complete attention. The message was clear. Their conversation was over, and her presence was now simply an obligation to be discharged as quickly as possible. By mid-afternoon, Clare could no longer stand the suffocating atmosphere of the shop. She announced her intention to take a walk, half hoping Jonas might suggest she stay warm inside, but he simply nodded without looking up from his work. The dismissal stung more than anger would have. The town looked different under the clear afternoon sky, less like a winter wonderland, and more like a place where real people lived real lives. Clare found herself walking aimlessly through the residential streets, observing details she'd missed during her earlier excursions. Children's toys scattered in snow-covered yards, cars that showed years of mountain weather wear, houses that spoke of generations of careful maintenance rather than instant renovation. This was Jonas's world stable, rooted, connected to something larger than individual ambition. It was everything her life in San Francisco wasn't, everything she'd been unconsciously searching for without knowing how to name it. Her wandering brought her to the small diner at the town center, a place Jonas had mentioned, but they'd never visited together. The warmth inside was welcoming, heavy with the scent of coffee and home cooking. Clare chose a corner booth and ordered coffee she didn't want, needing somewhere to sit that wasn't charged with the energy of her failures. "You're the woman staying with Jonas," said a voice beside her table. Clare looked up to see a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "I'm Linda Henderson, Maisie's teacher. She's been so excited about having you visit." Clare gestured to the opposite seat, grateful for any distraction from her spiraling thoughts. "Please, sit. Maisie is wonderful. You must enjoy having her in your class." Linda settled into the booth with the easy grace of someone comfortable in her own skin. "She's special, that one. Bright as anything, but more than that, she's got real emotional intelligence. Probably comes from having to process losing her mother so young. Jonas has done an incredible job with her. He has, though it hasn't been easy." Linda stirred sugar into her coffee with thoughtful movements. "First year after Sarah died, I wasn't sure either of them would make it. Jonas was so lost in his grief, and Maisie was this tiny thing trying to take care of her daddy because she was afraid of losing him too." The image of a 4-year-old Maisie attempting to comfort her grieving father made Clare's chest ache. She'd seen the easy affection between them now, but it was sobering to remember that their bond had been forged in loss and shaped by mutual need. How did they get through it? Time, mostly, and this community rallying around them. Jonas is the kind of man who gives everything he has to help others, but he's not so good at accepting help for himself. Took a while for him to let people support him. Linda studied Clare with the same perceptive attention Maisie often displayed. "Maisie says you're leaving tonight. My truck's been repaired. Time to get back to my regular life. Is it? Because from what I hear, you've seemed pretty content with irregular life these past few days." Clare felt heat rise in her cheeks. Even in a town this small, apparently her attachment to Jonas and Maisie hadn't gone unnoticed. "It's been a lovely break from routine, but everyone has to return to reality eventually." "Reality's a funny thing," Linda observed. "Sometimes what we think is real is just what we're used to, and what we think is impossible is just what we haven't tried yet." Before Clare could respond to this pointed observation, Linda's attention shifted to something behind Clare's shoulder. "Well, speak of the devil. Evening, Jonas." Clare turned to see Jonas in the diner's entrance, scanning the space until his eyes found her table. His expression was unreadable, but something in his posture suggested urgency rather than casual. "Social visiting. Linda, Clare," he said, approaching their booth. "Sorry to interrupt, but I need to speak with you, Clare. There's been a development." Linda gathered her coat with the understanding of someone well-versed in reading social situations. "I'll leave you two to talk. Clare, it was lovely meeting you properly. I hope we'll see you again sometime." After Linda left, Jonas slid into the vacated seat with obvious reluctance. Up close, Clare could see the strain in his face, the careful control that suggested he was working hard to manage difficult emotions. "What kind of development?" she asked. "Your assistant called the shop. Apparently, your disappearance has created some kind of crisis, and there are reporters heading this way. She wanted to warn you so you could leave before they arrive." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. In her determination to escape her life, she'd failed to consider that her absence might become news itself. The idea of media attention descending on Jonas's quiet community because of her selfish choices made her feel sick. "How long do we have?" "Maybe an hour, according to her. She said they tracked your last known location through your credit card usage and your phone's GPS before you went dark." Jonas's expression was grim. "Claire, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Anything. Is there any danger to Maisie or me from this attention? Any reason why having our names connected to yours might cause problems for us?" The question revealed the depth of his concern, not for himself, but for his daughter's safety and privacy. Claire realized that in all her calculations about escaping her life, she'd never considered how her problems might affect innocent people who'd shown her kindness. "No physical danger," she said quickly. "But the media attention could be intense. Invasive. They'll want to know everything about why I was here, what our relationship is. Your privacy will be compromised." Jonas nodded as if this confirmed his worst fears. "Then you need to leave. Now, before they arrive and turn our lives into some kind of circus." "Jonas, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to affect you. And, Maisie, if I could undo—" "There's no time for apologies right now," he said, though his tone was gentler than his words. "Your truck's ready, and you need to go. I'll deal with the reporters if they show up." Claire felt panic rising in her throat. This was how it would end, not with resolution or understanding, but with her fleeing like a criminal to protect the people she'd come to love from the consequences of her deception. "What will you tell them?" "The truth. That you were a stranded traveler who needed help, and we provided it. Nothing more, nothing less." The simplicity of his intended response highlighted how complicated she'd made everything through her lies. To Jonas, their interaction really had been that simple someone needed help, so he helped. The fact that she'd been running from a life of wealth and privilege was irrelevant to his fundamental decency. "I wish—" Claire started, then stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. "What do you wish?" "I wish I'd been brave enough to tell you the truth from the beginning. I wish I could stay and face this with you, instead of running away again. I wish I was the kind of person who deserved what you and Maisie offered me." Jonas was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with the intensity that had made her feel seen and understood during their best conversations. When he spoke, his voice carried a sadness that made her chest ache. "The person you were here, with us, she was exactly the kind of person who deserved all of that. The question is whether you're brave enough to choose to be her instead of the other version of yourself." Before Claire could respond, Jonas stood and placed money on the table for her coffee. "I'll bring your truck around to the front. Be ready to leave in 10 minutes. As he walked away, Claire realized that he'd just given her the most important gift possible, a choice. She could flee back to her old life, treating these 5 days as an interesting interlude before returning to business as usual. Or she could use this crisis as an opportunity to finally become the person she'd discovered herself to be in his company. The question was whether she had the courage to choose authenticity over safety, love over control, and an uncertain future over a successful but hollow past. Outside, she could hear the rumble of her truck's engine as Jonas brought it around front. In a few minutes, she would drive away from the best thing that had ever happened to her, unless she found the strength to make a different choice. But first, she had to figure out what that choice would look like, and whether she was finally ready to stop running from the life she actually wanted to live. 3 weeks later, Claire stood in her San Francisco penthouse office, staring out at a view that had once filled her with pride and now felt like a prison. The city spread below her in all its glittering complexity, but the vista that had once energized her now seemed cold and distant. Everything in her life had returned to its previous rhythm board meetings, product launches, strategic decisions. Yet nothing felt the same. Her assistant knocked and entered without waiting for permission, a habit that normally irritated Claire, but now barely registered. The quarterly reports are ready for your review, and the Times wants to schedule a follow-up interview about your sabbatical. Claire didn't turn from the window. Tell them I'm not available. Also, the developers are asking about the new user interface changes. They need your approval to move forward. Whatever they recommend is fine. Her assistant paused, clearly noting the uncharacteristic lack of engagement. Claire, are you feeling all right? You've seemed distant since you came back. Distant. It was an accurate description, though not in the way her assistant meant. Claire felt distant from everything that had once seemed important, as if she were observing her life from outside rather than actively participating in it. The passion that had driven her to build Connect Flow, to revolutionize how people found each other, had evaporated somewhere in the mountains of Colorado. I'm fine, she said automatically. Just tired. But she wasn't fine, and she wasn't just tired. She was heartbroken in a way that made her previous disappointments seem trivial. Every morning, she woke hoping that the ache in her chest would have faded, and every evening she went to bed knowing it had only deepened. Her phone buzzed with another notification from the app she'd created. Another success story from users who'd found love through her algorithms. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd built an empire helping strangers connect while remaining fundamentally isolated herself. Connect Flow's stock had recovered from the brief dip caused by her disappearance, but the victory felt hollow. That evening, Claire sat in her empty apartment with takeout. She wasn't eating and tried to focus on the manuscript her assistant had left for her review. Instead, she found herself thinking about Maisie's bedtime routine, about the way Jonas listened to his daughter's elaborate stories with complete attention, about the warmth of their small kitchen during improvised family dinners. She'd called the number Jonas had given her for emergencies twice in the past week, hanging up before anyone could answer. What could she possibly say? That she missed their life more than she'd ever missed anything? That she'd realized too late what she'd given up? That she was willing to trade everything she'd built for the chance to braid a 7-year-old's hair again? The sound of her doorbell surprised her. She rarely had unexpected visitors, and her building's security usually called ahead. Claire opened the door to find a delivery person holding a manila envelope with her name written in familiar handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened it, finding a single sheet of paper with a child's drawing. The image showed 3 stick figures standing in front of a small house, labeled in careful crayon letters, Daddy, me, and Miss Clare. At the bottom, in Maisie's distinctive writing, were the words, Miss Clare belongs in our story now. Claire sank into her chair, clutching. The drawing as tears she'd been holding back for weeks finally broke free. This was what she'd lost, not just Jonas's quiet strength or Maisie's innocent affection, but the possibility of belonging somewhere, of being part of something larger than her own ambitions. The next morning, Claire made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a month ago. She called an emergency board meeting and announced her intention to step down as CEO, maintaining majority ownership, but transitioning operational control to her capable second-in-command. The board's shock was palpable, but Claire found herself remarkably calm as she explained her decision. I built this company to help people find meaningful connections, she told them. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what meaningful connection actually looks like. I need time to remember who I am outside of this role. The legal and financial details would take time to sort out, but Claire found herself energized by possibility for the first time in weeks. She had a plan. Now, uncertain and terrifying, but real in a way that her previous success had never been. 2 days later, she was driving through familiar mountain roads in a modest SUV she'd bought specifically for Colorado winters. Her penthouse apartment had been put on the market, her designer wardrobe donated to charity, her life reduced to what could fit in 2 suitcases. Everything she'd once thought essential had proven surprisingly easy to abandon. The town looked different in late autumn, the snow-covered peaks now revealing rocky faces and evergreen forests. Claire drove slowly through the streets she'd memorized. During her brief stay, noting changes and constants with nervous attention. There was Mrs. Chun's house, the small diner where Linda Henderson had offered cryptic wisdom, the school where Maisie spent her days learning and growing. And there, at the end of the familiar gravel drive, was Jonas's shop, looking exactly as she remembered it. Warm light spilled from the windows, and she could see his silhouette moving inside with a purposeful energy she'd come to associate with his approach to work. Claire sat in her car for a long moment, gathering courage. She had no guarantee that Jonas would forgive her deception, no assurance that she could rebuild what her lies had destroyed. But Maisie's drawing lay on the passenger seat beside her, a reminder that sometimes love required acts of faith that couldn't be calculated or guaranteed. She pulled into the parking area just as the shop door opened and Jonas emerged, probably drawn by the sound of an unfamiliar engine. When he saw her stepping out of the SUV, his expression shifted through surprise, wariness, and something that might have been hope. "Claire," he said simply, as if her name contained questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. "Jonas." She approached, slowly, drinking in the sight of him, the careful way he held himself, the uncertainty in his eyes, the familiar strength in his stance. "I know I don't have any right to be here after how I left things, but I needed to tell you something." "What's that?" Claire reached into her car and retrieved the drawing, holding it out to him like an offering. Maisie was right. "I do belong in your story. Not because I forced my way in with lies and deception, but because what we found together was real, and real things are worth fighting for." Jonas took the drawing, his expression softening as he recognized his daughter's artwork. "She asked me to send that, said you looked sad when you left, and maybe it would help you remember something important." It did help me remember. It helped me remember that some things matter more than safety or success or protecting yourself from disappointment. Claire took a shaky breath. "I love you, Jonas. I love Maisie. I love the life you've built here, and I want to be part of it if you'll let me try to earn that privilege." Jonas was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if looking for signs of the deception that had wounded him before. When he spoke, his voice was careful, but not cold. "What about your company? Your life in San Francisco?" "I stepped down. As CEO, I'm keeping ownership, but I'm not running the day-to-day operations anymore." Claire felt steadier as she explained her decision. "I realized that I'd built something I thought would make me happy, but it was actually keeping me from the kind of life I really wanted." "And what kind of life is that?" "One where I matter to people who matter to me. One where love is more important than achievement. One where I can help a little girl with her homework and learn to fix engines and be part of a community that actually takes care of each other." She paused, vulnerability making her voice smaller. "One where I can wake up every morning next to someone who loves me for who I am, instead of what I can do for them." Jonas stepped closer, close enough that she could see the careful hope beginning to replace the wariness in his expression. "That sounds like a good life. But Claire, if we're going to try this, I need complete honesty. No more hiding, no more carefully edited versions of yourself. Just the truth, even when it's complicated or uncomfortable." "Just the truth," she agreed, "even when it scares me." "Good." Jonas reached out to touch her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Because the truth is that I've missed you every day since you left. And the truth is that Maisie has been asking when you're coming home for 3 weeks straight. Home, Claire repeated, testing the weight of the word. I like the sound of that. Before Jonas could respond, the sound of running feet announced Maisie's arrival from wherever she'd been playing. The child appeared around the corner of the building at full speed, her face lighting up with pure joy when she saw Clare. Miss Clare, you came back. Daddy said maybe you would, but I wasn't sure because grown-ups sometimes don't do what they say they'll do, but you did. Clare caught Maisie in a fierce hug, breathing in the scent of sunshine and childhood that clung to her hair. I came back because this is where I belong, if your daddy will have me. Maisie pulled back to look at her with serious eyes. Are you going to stay this time? Really stay? Really stay, Claire promised, meaning it more completely than she'd ever meant anything. If that's okay with you. It's very okay with me, Maisie said solemnly. Now we can finish my family tree project, and you can teach Daddy how to make your hair braids. And maybe we can get a dog, because families should have dogs. And Daddy always says we'll think about it, but we never do. Claire laughed, the sound, rusty from disuse, but genuine in a way that made her feel alive again. We'll have to talk to your daddy about the dog. But yes, we can finish your family tree project. As Jonas put his arm around her shoulders, and Maisie chattering excitedly about all the plans they could now make together, Claire realized that she'd finally found what she'd been searching for without knowing it. Not the perfect life, but the real one. Not the successful love story, but the authentic one. It had just taken losing everything she thought she wanted to discover what she actually needed. That evening, after Maisie had been tucked into bed with promises that Clare would still be there in the morning, Jonas and Clare found themselves sitting on the small porch behind his cabin, wrapped in blankets and sharing a thermos of coffee. The mountain air was crisp with the promise of winter, and stars filled the sky with a brilliance that city lights had never allowed Clare to appreciate. I need to tell you something, Jonas said, his voice carrying the weight of words he'd been considering for weeks. After you left, I was angry. Not just hurt, but genuinely angry about the deception. Claire nodded, having expected this conversation and dreading it in equal measure. You had every right to be. Maybe, but the anger didn't last as long as I thought it would. What lasted was missing you. Missing the way you listened when Maisie talked about her day. Missing how you looked when you figured out something new about the engine. Missing the way it felt to have someone to share the quiet moments with. I missed that too. All of it. Jonas turned to face her more directly, his expression serious in the dim light from the cabin windows. Claire, I need you to understand something about what you're choosing. This isn't a romantic vacation or a temporary escape from your real life. This is my real life, and it comes with real challenges. What kind of challenges? Financial stress. For one, the shop makes enough to keep us going, but there's no cushion for emergencies. When Maisie needs new clothes or the furnace breaks down, I lose sleep worrying about how to cover the costs. Jonas's honesty was unflinching, as if he was determined to give her every reason to reconsider. And it gets lonely here in the winters, really lonely. The kind of isolation that makes some people desperate to escape. Claire listened to his litany of difficulties without interrupting, recognizing that he was offering her a gift, the chance to choose their life with complete knowledge of what it would require. There's also the community, Jonas continued. People here have known each other for decades. They're welcoming, but they also have long memories and strong opinions. If you stay, you'll be Maisie's stepmother, and everyone will have thoughts about how you should handle that responsibility. Are you trying to scare me away? I'm trying to make sure you know what you're choosing. Because if you change your mind again, if you decide this life isn't what you thought it would be, it won't just hurt me, it'll devastate Maisie. The weight of that responsibility settled on Claire's shoulders like a physical thing. She'd never been responsible for a child's emotional well-being before. Never had her choices matter so completely to someone so vulnerable. "I understand," she said quietly. "And I need you to understand something too. I'm not the same person who left here 3 weeks ago. The woman who built Connect Flow was brilliant at managing outcomes and controlling variables. But she was also terrified of genuine intimacy because she couldn't control it." Jonas waited, sensing that she was working towards something important. "The woman sitting here with you now has learned that some things are worth the risk of losing control, worth the risk of being hurt, worth the risk of failing." Claire pulled her blanket tighter, not from cold, but from the vulnerability of complete honesty. "I'm scared, Jonas. Scared that I won't be good enough for Maisie. Scared that I'll make mistakes that hurt both of you. Scared that I'll wake up one day and realize I've lost everything that matters." "Good," Jonas said, surprising her. "If you weren't scared, I'd be worried you didn't understand what we're talking about. Good? Love is scary. Real love, the kind that changes everything, it's terrifying because it asks you to trust someone else with the most important parts of yourself." Jonas reached for her hand, his fingers warm and calloused against her smooth skin. "Sarah used to say that the best things in life require the biggest leaps of faith." Claire felt tears gathering in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being truly understood. "I want to take that leap with you, with both of you. Even knowing that I'll never be able to give you the kind of life you're used to, the luxury, the travel, the excitement of building something that changes the world." Claire considered the question seriously, thinking about the penthouse apartment she'd sold, the designer clothes she'd donated, the corporate meetings that had once seemed so vital. None of it felt like loss now. It felt like shedding weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. "The life I'm used to was successful, but not satisfying. I had everything I thought I wanted, and nothing I actually needed." She squeezed his hand, grounding herself in the solid reality of his presence. "I don't need luxury, Jonas. I need purpose. I need to matter to people who matter to me. I need to be part of something real." Jonas was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the starlight as if trying to read her soul. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I love you, Claire Devlin. Not Claire Davis, not the woman you thought you had to be to earn affection, but exactly who you are right now, sitting here choosing this complicated, uncertain life with me." The words hit Claire with the force of absolute truth. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it, not love that was earned through achievement or performance, but love that was offered freely to the person she actually was. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both natural and revolutionary. "I love your patience and your strength, and the way you see solutions where other people see problems. I love how you've raised Maisie to be confident and kind. I love that you fixed my truck and saved my life without knowing anything about who I was supposed to be." They sat in comfortable silence after that, hands linked and shoulders touching, both processing the magnitude of what they'd just committed. Too, Claire felt something settle inside her chest, a sense of rightness that had nothing to do with logic or planning, and everything to do with finally being where she belonged. "There's something else we need to talk about," Jonas said eventually. "The practical things. Where you'll live, how we'll handle the financial aspects, what role you'll play in Maisie's life." Claire had been thinking about these questions during her drive from San Francisco, developing plans that felt both generous and appropriate. "I'd like to buy the Peterson place, if it's still for sale. It's close enough that we can be part of each other's daily lives, but separate enough that we can take things at a reasonable pace." Jonas looked surprised. "That's a big property." "Are you sure you want to take on that much land?" "I'm sure. I was thinking about turning part of it into a workshop space, maybe doing some consulting work for small tech companies that need help with user experience design. Nothing like what I did before, but enough to contribute financially and stay intellectually engaged." "What about Maisie?" I'd like to be her friend first, and see what develops naturally. I know I can't replace her mother, and I wouldn't want to try. But if she let me, I'd love to be someone she can count on, someone who shows up for school, plays and helps with homework, and teaches her about things her father might not know. Jonas nodded slowly, clearly thinking through the implications. She's going to want to call you Mom eventually. She's been without a mother for so long that having a woman in her life who cares about her. He trailed off, emotion making his voice unsteady. When and if she's ready for that, I'll be honored, Claire said simply, but there's no rush. We have time to figure out how to be a family. A family, Jonas repeated, as if testing the concept. I'd given up on thinking about that. After Sarah died, it felt like Maisie and I were complete, that adding anyone else would be betraying her memory somehow. And now? Now I think Sarah would be happy that we found someone who loves us enough to choose this life over an easier one. She always said that love wasn't about finding the perfect person, but about choosing to build something beautiful with someone who shares your values. Claire felt a deep sense of gratitude toward a woman she'd never met, but whose influence permeated every aspect of the life she was choosing. Sarah had loved these people well, had created the foundation of strength and kindness that made their current happiness possible. I hope I can honor what she built here, Claire said. You already have, Jonas replied, pulling her closer. Just by choosing to stay, by committing to being part of our story instead of writing your own separate one. As they sat together under the vast mountain sky, Claire realized that she'd finally found what her dating app had been designed to help others discover. Not perfect compatibility, but the willingness to choose love over fear, authenticity over image, and shared values over individual success. It had just taken losing everything. She thought she wanted to find everything she actually needed. 6 months later, Claire stood in the kitchen of the renovated Peterson house, morning sunlight streaming through windows. She'd had enlarged to capture the mountain views that never failed to take her breath away. The house had been transformed from a neglected property into a warm, welcoming home that honored its rustic character while incorporating modern conveniences that made daily life more comfortable. The workshop space she'd created in the converted barn had exceeded her expectations, becoming a hub for the small consulting business she'd built around, helping purpose-driven startups create more intuitive user experiences. And work was engaging without being consuming, profitable without being stressful, and meaningful in ways her previous corporate success had never been. But the real transformation wasn't in the property or the business. It was in herself. Woman who'd fled San Francisco 6 months ago had been successful but hollow, accomplished but isolated. The woman preparing breakfast for her chosen family was still learning, still growing, but finally completely alive. Miss Clare. Maisie's voice called from the mudroom, followed by the sound of boots being kicked off with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Daddy says you made cinnamon rolls. I attempted cinnamon rolls, Claire corrected as Maisie burst into the kitchen, her cheeks red from the cold and her eyes bright with anticipation. Whether the first succeeded is still up for debate. The 8-year-old her birthday had been a celebration that included half the town and ended with Claire officially being declared part of the family in Maisie's estimation examined, the golden pastries cooling on the counter with the seriousness of a professional food critic. They look perfect, she pronounced. Can I have one now, or do we have to wait for Daddy? We should wait. He'll be here any minute. As if summoned by their conversation, Jonas appeared in the doorway, stomping snow from his boots and carrying the scent of cold air and pine with him. His face lit up when he saw them, the expression of a man who still couldn't quite believe his good fortune, but had learned to accept it gratefully. Something smells incredible in here, he said, kissing Claire's cheek before ruffling Maisie's hair. Please tell me those are what I think they are. Claire made cinnamon rolls from scratch, Maisie announced proudly, as if she'd personally supervised the process. And she didn't even burn them this time. "Hey," Claire protested with mock indignation. "That only happened once, and the smoke alarm was being overly sensitive." Jonas laughed, the sound filling the kitchen with warmth that had nothing to do with the oven. "Well, I'm impressed regardless. My own baking skills haven't progressed much beyond opening packages." They settled around the kitchen table that Clare had found at an antique shop in town, sharing breakfast and the easy conversation that had become the foundation of their daily routine. Maisie chattered about her upcoming school science fair project. Jonas mentioned a classic car restoration he was considering taking on, and Claire described a video call she'd had with a promising new client. The ordinariness of it all would have seemed unremarkable to an outside observer, but to Claire, these morning conversations represented everything she'd been unconsciously searching for during her years of professional success. Connection without agenda, affection without performance, presence without pressure. "Oh, I almost forgot," Jonas said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Mrs. Chun stopped by the shop yesterday with something for you." He handed Claire a manila envelope with her name written in the precise handwriting she'd come to associate with their elderly neighbor. Inside was a photograph of Claire and Maisie from the previous weekend's town fair, both of them laughing at something Jonas had said from behind the camera. But what made Claire's breath catch was the inscription on the back. "For our Clare, may you always remember that the best families are chosen with the heart." She's been working on a photo album of town events, Jonas explained, noting Claire's emotional reaction to the gift. "Says every family needs pictures to help them remember the good times." Claire studied the photograph, seeing herself through Mrs. Chun's eyes, not as the successful CEO who'd built a tech empire, but as a woman who'd found her place in a community that valued presence over achievement. Her hair was windblown, her clothes practical rather than fashionable, and her expression held the kind of unguarded happiness that no amount of professional success had ever produced. "I love it," she said simply, meaning far more than just the photograph. After breakfast, as had become their weekend tradition, they walked the short distance to Jonas's cabin so Maisie could work on her perpetual art projects while the adults dealt with the less creative aspects of daily life. Claire had maintained the spare room above the shop as an office space, but increasingly she found herself drawn to the cabin's kitchen table when she needed to think through complex problems. "I got a call from a reporter yesterday," Jonas mentioned as they settled into their respective tasks. "Someone from a business magazine doing a follow-up story about whatever happened to Claire Devlin." Claire looked up from her laptop, noting the careful neutrality in his voice. "What did you tell them?" "That you were unavailable for comment, and that we'd appreciate our privacy being respected." Jonas paused in his review of invoices. "But it got me thinking about whether this kind of attention bothers you. Whether you miss the recognition that came with your previous success." It was a fair question, one that Claire had asked herself frequently during the early months of her transition. The media attention around her departure from ConnectFlow had been intense but brief, replaced by other stories as the business world moved on to its next obsessions. Occasionally, articles still appeared speculating about her current activities, but her decision to maintain complete privacy had eventually made her yesterday's news. "I don't miss the recognition," she said honestly. "What I miss sometimes is the feeling of building something that could help people on a large scale. They sensed that my work was making a meaningful difference in the world. And now?" Claire considered the question while watching Maisie carefully add details to a drawing of their house, complete with the three figures that had become her standard representation of their family. "Now I think I understand that impact isn't just about scale. Helping one startup create a better user experience might only affect thousands of people instead of millions, but it's still meaningful work. And," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "being part of Maisie's life, contributing to who she becomes, that feels like the most important work I've ever done." Jonas smiled, the expression holding depths of understanding that still took Claire's breath away. Sarah used to say that some of the most important work happens one person at a time, one relationship at a time. That the small connections are what make the big ones possible. Smart woman, she was, and she would have loved you. A simple statement carried weight that had taken Clare months to fully appreciate. Jonas's acceptance of her place in his life had required him to make peace with loving someone new without betraying his first wife's memory. It had been a delicate process, one that had taught Clare about the difference between replacing someone and honoring their legacy while moving forward. That evening, as they gathered for dinner at the house Clare now called home, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The desperate woman who'd fled San Francisco had been running from emptiness disguised as success. The woman sitting at this table had learned that true success wasn't about building something impressive, it was about building something real. As Jonas helped Maisie with her math homework and Clare cleaned up from dinner, she was struck by the profound ordinariness of their happiness. There were no dramatic gestures or grand romantic declarations, just the steady accumulation of shared moments that created a life worth living. Later, after Maisie had been tucked into bed with promises that Clare would still be there in the morning, a ritual that continued despite months of evidence that she wasn't going anywhere, Clare and Jonas sat on the porch that expanded to accommodate evenings like this one. "Do you ever regret it?" Jonas asked quietly. "Giving up everything you'd built for this?" Clare considered the question seriously, as she always did when he asked it. The answer had evolved over the months, from tentative confidence to absolute certainty. "I didn't give up everything I'd built," she said finally. "I gave up everything I thought I was supposed to want in order to build something I actually needed. There's a difference." Jonas reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "I love you, Claire Devlin. The real you, the complete you, the you that chose this life over an easier one." "I love you too," she replied, the words carrying the weight of certainty earned through time and tested by challenge. "All of you, all of this, all of what we're building together." As they sat together under the vast mountain sky, Claire realized that her story hadn't ended when she'd left her old life behind. It had finally begun. She'd spent years helping other people find connection through technology, but it had taken losing everything she thought she wanted to discover what authentic connection actually required, not algorithms or optimization or careful management of variables, but simply the courage to choose love over fear, authenticity over image, and presence over performance. The courage to build a life measured not by achievements, but by relationships, not by success, but by significance, not by what she could acquire, but by what she could give. It was, she thought as Jonas squeezed her hand and Maisie's breathing settled into the peaceful rhythm of childhood sleep, exactly the life she'd been searching for without knowing it. Imperfect, uncertain, and absolutely real in all the ways that mattered most.